Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Geek-Stew. And today, guys, welcome back to another episode of Conspiracy Theories with Ike. That is right. Today, guys, we're going to be talking about another conspiracy theory. This one's a little, it's kind of follows a similar thread to a lot of the other, conspiracy theories we talk about. Has a lot of the same, details and level of conspiracy in a way. This one's a little bit higher on the totem pole in regards to conspiracy theories, especially when we look at the conspiracy theory iceberg that we've been looking at and talking about. I always put it up on screen. I always like to make the joke that it is literally the biggest thing that I've ever seen, the hugest conspiracy theory iceberg. And I love taking stuff from this. And I'm actually going to, in the beginning, say a special thank you to the creator of this iceberg, Cicada1205 on Reddit. Again, I don't know if this person has ever watched my videos or probably will never ever watch my videos, but I want to thank them genuinely from the bottom of my heart. This has given me a project and something to do that I really enjoyed doing. But today, guys, this is going to be a conversation about the conspiracy theory called the Caveman Holocaust or the Caveman Genocide. So as always, we have to talk about a little bit of context before we actually get into the theory itself. So let's kind of talk about that first. Now, as you might know, you and I kind of fall into the category of Homo sapiens. There are other types of humans that have existed over the course of our human history. Now, that does rely on the concept that you believe in evolution, or you believe that the Earth is so many years old, or whatever the case may be. But just to give you a few examples, many types of primitive humans have existed. So I'm probably going to butcher these, so anybody out there, I don't know what this would fall under, biology, anthropology, whatever ology that this falls under, and whatever ologist that I'm about to offend, I'm very sorry. So the Homo naledi from South Africa, the Homo luzonensis from Philippines, Homo florensis from Indonesia, the Homo erectus from Indonesia, that one's kind of one that I've heard of personally, the Homo rhodensis from Central Africa, and I have heard of this, the red deer cave people from China. So those are just some various primitive human, names and titles that have been given to these humans from different areas that have popped up throughout, the history of the world, right? And some of them I have heard of, most of them I have not. But what I do know is that you and I are called Homo sapiens, and we've existed, if I remember correctly, about 250 to 350,000 years or something like that. But that being said, with that context in mind, about 10,000 years ago, all of these other species of humans were gone. Now, there's not really a reason or rhyme to it. There are a lot of theories regarding it, but ultimately you and I, scientists and everything else, aren't ever going to really be able to determine exactly why they disappeared. They most likely died off due to one of a many number of reasons. But now we can actually get into what we would consider the theory of the Caveman Holocaust / Caveman Genocide. So as mentioned before, about 10,000 years ago, all of these various types of cavemen / primitive human species were extinct. This process resembles a mass extinction. There were no obvious environmental catastrophes. Typically when things like this happen, when entire civilizations disappear or just up and vanish, there's something that would indicate why they disappeared. Volcanoes, earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, whatever the case is. There's no obvious environmental catastrophe that would what's the word I'm looking for? That would align with their disappearance. So obviously that raises some speculation as to why they actually disappeared, what caused it, and so on and so forth. So that being said, the extinction's timing also suggests that they were caused by the spread of a new species, and that new species being Homo sapiens, which would be South Africa from 250 to 350,000 years ago. So the disappearance of these other species aligns and connects to the appearance of other species, such as Homo sapiens, which in this case is going to be what the theory is about, indicating that Homo sapiens caused the genocide, and they call it a holocaust, of the other species of humans. Now, obviously, we know that war and violence is not, obviously it kind of depends on your thought process on this. A lot of the articles are about on this because this theory actually had a lot of resources. It wasn't just Reddit. Reddit presented it to me, but I was able to go in and find other information pieces to try and explain this by actually just Googling it, whereas normally that's not the case. So there were a lot of things that people theorized that happened, but a lot of people do think that it's possible that they died due to violence. Now, obviously, we can't ever really determine why they died. It most likely had something to do with resources and land, and it was most likely nothing to do with anything but that fact. But it also brings into question, did we cause the extinction of other human species because of that? To add to that, obviously there are other speculations in regards to why these people disappeared. Some people actually have theorized that it had something to do with some sort of prejudice against these other species of humans. They have the concept of, they look different than us. I think there's a phrase for it. It's called the uncanny valley. The closer something looks to human, the more discontented or discomforted we are, or something to that regard. So it's possible that could have had something to do with it. But regardless, the concept that we're kind of operating off of is that through some mechanism of war and violence and possibly, issues of, land and resources and everything else, these other species of humans were eventually caused to go extinct. Now, the theory kind of relies on that fact that we were like hunting these other cavemen, and which is very interesting to think that, early Homo sapiens were somehow driven to hunt and cause the extinction of these other human species. And then also kind of brings in the question, like, why did we do that? And like I said, there are 1,000,000,001 reasons as to why that could have happened, in regards to why we would have caused them to go extinct. But clearly you and I have no real true idea. It wasn't like we had super good record keeping at this time. It wasn't like there was the possibility that we could record what was happening. We have cave paintings and everything else and things of that nature, early primitive record keeping, but nothing concrete to the point that we could truly determine what was actually happening. But the concept of the caveman holocaust does indicate, the theory at least, that we essentially caused the total annihilation, genocide, extinction of these humans for some reason. Again, resources and land is most likely what it was. That's typically what these battles and wars were about. They had land that we wanted, they had resources that we wanted or needed, therefore they had to go. And with that being said, I do want to talk about some alternatives that I think are perhaps more likely, and talk a little bit about that, and then maybe give some final thoughts in closing. But definitely it's an interesting theory to think that for some reason early Homo sapiens hunted and killed these other humans, these alternative species of humans, for essentially no reason. As good as a theory is that we basically hunted and caused the complete extinction and genocide of these other human species, as much as I like that theory and as much as it may be interesting, and I mean, hell, somebody can make a movie about it, all right, or a cartoon, that's fine. But I don't think that necessarily, I'm sure that there was conflicts. I'm sure that, the species butted heads, because obviously we know that early species were able to develop communities and everything else. So I'm sure that there were some forms of conflict that were resolved with violence and war. We know that happened. We know that can happen. So obviously the concept of resources and land is probably most likely what happened, is that basically they just got pushed out from their, where they were, and they eventually died because they didn't have the necessary resources or land management or whatever the case may be. But some alternatives to why they went extinct that I've kind of read up on that maybe seem a little more likely, because obviously, don't get me wrong, Caveman Holocaust, it's a great title for a YouTube video. Not super likely though, just because while I feel like it's possible that there were conflicts, I don't think that the conflicts that the different species had with one another, or specifically the Homo sapiens had with the other species, I don't necessarily think that those conflicts would have caused a complete extinction unless we were, specifically seeking them out. But I think that then kind of devolves into more of an issue of prejudice, or an issue of like we wanted them to be extinct, right? We had some issue with them. And then I think that kind of goes into a concept of, is that like a form of racism? Does that kind of devolve into a concept of an early signifier of what we would consider race, or species, where we, where we're hunting these other species for some, biological condition? I don't know. There are all kinds of things that kind of go into that. I don't know if it's super realistic, but I mean, somebody else who knows more about this maybe can tell me. But some alternatives that I think were probably more likely, perhaps the evolution of human species over time caused these other earlier species to maybe be a little more, what would you say, likely to be sick. I don't know. Maybe it could have been disease. They could have been more susceptible to diseases that maybe the Homo sapiens weren't. Any number of unknown factors. Like there were like all kinds of like small things that people were talking about, and interbreeding and continued, basically genetic conditions and things like that would cause their lines to eventually die out. And the difference with Homo sapiens is that the Homo sapiens, being a newer species and possibly the creation of other species breeding with one another, caused a more diverse genetic pool. And then the Homo sapiens then bred with other species as well, which then continued to branch off and create additional branches and lines and species of Homo sapiens, and so on and so forth. So it's this ultimate concept of, it could have been any other number of unknown factors, genetic issues, interbreeding issues, simple breeding issues. Maybe something happened genetically that caused some of them to go sterile and they couldn't continue to breed. That was a very common thing that I heard as well. And then, of course, there are also the concept of unseen issues or natural events. Maybe we can't see the natural event. Maybe there's no physical landmark of the natural event. But who knows, something as simple as a windstorm, especially for people who are not sheltered or aren't on their land, or maybe don't have the resources to survive long winters or stuff like that. Obviously, there's not a huge library of books that can discuss and delineate specifically this is what happened from this time to this time, but it could be any other number of unseen or unrecorded or unknowable natural events. Also during this time, you're looking at the Ice Age and all kinds of other significant events for this period that are happening around the same time that these species are going extinct. So it's ultimately very possible that that's exactly what happened. But with all that being said, this obviously is just a theory. I'm not super knowledgeable about this. I basically did the research from the perspective of trying to see whether or not the Caveman Holocaust / genocide would be realistic, or if that's something that did happen. Like I said, there's a lot of resources that do talk about this subject, so there's a lot of information out there, thankfully. I feel like everything else that I've talked about prior to this has been like super vague and like not a lot of research that was existing about it. But this one at least had some information, so I was able to kind of, I guess, at least identify whether or not I think this is even possible, which personally I don't necessarily think that we specifically hunted them for the cause of extermination. I think it's more likely that they most likely were pushed off their lands and resources were used up and everything else. But before we get too deep into that, I think I'm going to close this off and go into final thoughts, kind of talk a little bit more about it, and ultimately end the episode. But I hope you guys have enjoyed so far, but let's get into the final thoughts. So final thoughts. So obviously there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot that we did talk about, and there's even more that we could talk about, which is a good thing about this theory specifically, is that there's a lot of information available for it, and it's not super vague and it's not super unknown. I think that, in my opinion, if I had to give you my thoughts on why these other species of humans went extinct, I would personally chalk it up to three things. A, these other species were possibly just it could have just been natural selection. Maybe there was something genetically wrong with them to the extent of issues breeding, or potentially issues trying to survive. Like we said, susceptibility to different illnesses, maybe. So I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is that depending on where they were, they could have potentially fallen factor to unknown issues like wildlife. Maybe they were in areas where there was really dangerous wildlife, or some other form of natural event that we can't really record or see. That would be my second thing. The third thing, most likely, was resources and land. I mean, we fought over resources and land for as long as we can, for as long as record history has had us. I mean, literally, I can't even count on all hands and toes and everything else how many times that in our world one group has attacked another group for resources. Even in the modern age, we're still attacking Middle East countries for oil. So, I mean, political commentary slip right in there, but it boils down to, I think, that the Homo sapiens were maybe more capable of understanding like the military process, maybe, or like the combat process, and maybe they got smart and they were figuring out like, oh, we just need to ambush them and get them out of their land, and then we can take their land and their resources. And I think that's probably what it boils down to, is that we just wanted their resources and land, or we needed their resources and land, or we thought that we needed their resources and land, and then eventually we fought them, killed some of them, and then the ones that weren't killed, they were most likely pushed off and then, eventually died because they didn't have resources or shelter. So yeah, that's my thought process. Again, not an anthropologist, not a biologist, not even a historian. Just I talk about bullshit on the internet. But that being said, I want to give another thanks to Cicada 1205 for the conspiracy theory and the iceberg altogether. Obviously, I know they probably didn't come up with a specific conspiracy theory, but they did put it in the iceberg, and they also did the service of talking about it on the Reddit, which was a lot of cool information on there, of course. And then that gave me the ability to research it further, and I was able to find more resources on Google, which is great. So if you guys are interested in this, feel free to look it up on your own time. There's a lot more information out there than what I've provided to you. What I provided to you, I would say, is barely a synopsis. Mostly it's just me rambling about something called the Caveman Holocaust or the Caveman Genocide. So that being said, if you guys want to join the Geek-Stew crew, hit us up on social media. Leave your at or your handle down below, and we can reach out to you as well. We have different stuff coming up in the future. I hope you guys have enjoyed your videos so far this week. I know earlier this week we did a new video about Indiana Beach. Also, we did a video for Control for C, so feel free to like and review those videos as well. And then, as always, stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy, stay awesome. Any question, everything. We will see you in the next one. See ya.